I stood barefoot on my driveway, blood trickling down my knuckles, my breath calm despite the chaos around me. HOA cops, sprawled on the ground, groaning and holding their ribs, didn't know they'd just raided the house of a professional MMA fighter. I looked at their twisted badges and fake authority scattered in the dirt and wondered, how far will an HOA go before someone finally fights back? For as long as I can remember, the Oak Ridge Hills community was my sanctuary, a slice of suburban paradise where life moved with a gentle rhythm. Far from the chaos of the city and the echoes of the brutal fights that defined my career, my home, nestled within this serene backdrop of manicured lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, and neighbors who waved warmly each morning, had always been my haven. Retiring from professional MMA fighting had allowed me to savor mornings, spent jogging leisurely through tree-lined streets and evenings dedicated to training quietly in my home gym. I cherished this peace deeply, more for my family's sake than my own. My wife Lisa thrived in her gardening, our yard a vibrant testament to her meticulous care. My daughter Emily blossomed here, freely riding her bicycle with friends through sun-dappled streets. It was precisely this tranquil beauty that I'd fought so hard in the cage to earn, each bruise and broken bone exchanged willingly for a life of quiet dignity and comfort. Yet, despite the outward serenity, dark currents were beginning to flow beneath Oak Ridge's idyllic surface, brought about by the iron grip of the newly empowered HOA board. The first whispers of trouble were subtle enough, a letter here, a flyer there, quiet reminders of community standards, polite but chillingly impersonal. Soon, though, these benign nudges transformed into blatant invasions into our lives, micromanaging everything from mailbox colors to the height of bushes. It seemed absurd initially, a minor annoyance we all laughed off over neighborhood barbecues. But that laughter gradually turned bitter as the HOA tightened its grip, instilling a silent, collective anxiety within our community. Then, inevitably, their gaze turned toward my home. One day, a crisp official envelope appeared, neatly pinned to our front door, outlining a fresh set of community safety regulations. Reading it felt surreal. According to the new directive, personal exercise equipment, particularly heavy punching bags, sparring mats, and potentially hazardous fitness items, were classified as dangerous contraband, detrimental to community welfare. This was no random act. The regulations were drafted with chilling precision, targeting precisely the items housed within my meticulously maintained home gym. As I held the notice, feeling its weight in my hands, a quiet anger stirred in my chest. My equipment was not dangerous, it was personal, necessary for my mental health, and an integral part of the routine that kept me anchored after years spent fighting professionally. It felt as though the HOA had intruded into my life, reaching into my home to dictate how I could live, how I could breathe, and how I could maintain my peace. Determined to face this absurdity head-on, I attended the next scheduled HOA meeting. The community center, usually sparsely attended, buzzed that evening with anxious residents who had also fallen under the heavy shadow of HOA overreach. I sat quietly among them, observing neighbors who'd always greeted me warmly now whispering nervously amongst themselves, afraid of attracting the attention of the authoritative board. When it came time for resident comments, I stood slowly, meeting the gaze of the HOA president, Richard Barnes, a retired lawyer known less for justice and more for his ruthless enforcement of petty rules. I spoke calmly, clearly, outlining the irrationality of their demands. I presented detailed evidence of my equipment's safe usage and questioned the legality and ethical basis for these new restrictions. My tone was respectful but firm, my voice betraying none of the internal frustration boiling within. I watched Barnes closely, saw the tight smile forming on his lips, a smile that conveyed disdain more vividly than words ever could. He dismissed my objections with curt condescension, asserting vaguely about protecting community safety and integrity, a phrase as empty as it was insulting. Despite my logical arguments, the board remained unmoved, their minds apparently decided long before I'd stepped into the room. What happened next caught me completely off guard. A week later, at the annual Oak Ridge Community Day, a festive event traditionally filled with food, music, laughter, and neighborhood bonding, I became an unwilling spectacle. I had just finished participating in the charity raffle, and was enjoying a casual conversation with neighbors, holding a cup of lemonade, when Barnes took the makeshift stage. A sudden quiet descended as he cleared his throat, tapping his microphone with an eerie, calculated precision. His voice echoed through speakers scattered around the community park, delivering words chosen deliberately to humiliate. He announced publicly, without warning, that my refusal to comply with their new safety regulations was a threat to the entire community, labeling my home gym as a dangerous environment and me, personally, as a community menace. I felt a rush of blood heat my face as dozens of eyes turned toward me, some neighbors openly shocked, others looking away in embarrassed silence. Emily clung tightly to my hand, confused and frightened by the sudden hostility directed at her father, while Lisa stiffened beside me, dignity clinging tightly to her delicate frame, though her eyes shimmered with hurt. I took a measured breath, swallowing the humiliation that burned bitterly in my throat. Though every fiber in my being wanted to retaliate, to publicly rebuke Barnes for his malicious portrayal, I knew any outburst would only validate his accusations. Instead, I remained composed, maintaining a facade of calm dignity, even as my heart pounded furiously. Inside, though, a promise formed, a silent vow never again to allow such disrespect to scar my family's name or dignity. As Barnes continued to elaborate, spinning exaggerated tales of danger lurking within my supposedly hazardous training regimen, something shifted deep within me. Oak Ridge had been my sanctuary, a place of peace bought with blood, sweat, and bruises accumulated from years in the unforgiving world of professional combat. Now, that peace was tainted, corrupted by petty authoritarianism masquerading as safety and civility. With Barnes's voice still echoing mockingly in my ears, I felt the weight of a new kind of fight settling over me, a battle not for trophies or fame, but for the fundamental right to live freely and peacefully within my own home. In the quiet moments that followed Barnes's shameful display, I could sense the community's unease, neighbors subtly exchanging glances, uncertain how to react. Yet in those uncertain gazes, I saw seeds of doubt, faint signs that perhaps they too felt trapped, longing for someone to stand against the iron fist of our increasingly oppressive HOA. I knew this was just the beginning, a line drawn deliberately in the sand by those who believed they could control every aspect of our lives. Yet, as I stood there with Emily's small hand in mine, feeling her pulse flutter nervously beneath my fingertips, my internal vow hardened into resolve. Barnes and his cronies believed they had targeted an easy mark, a quiet neighbor whose days of confrontation were behind him. But they were mistaken. They had awakened a fighter, someone trained not merely to resist but to prevail. And while outwardly I projected calm and quiet dignity, inside, my soul had begun preparing for a fight. One far more personal, one where the stakes were not titles or acclaim, but the very sanctity and dignity of the family and home I had sworn to protect. Following Barnes's public display of hostility, the tension within Oak Ridge Hills intensified, invading every quiet moment of our once peaceful lives. What started as mere annoyance became a relentless campaign of targeted harassment. Surveillance cameras suddenly appeared, discreetly but strategically placed throughout the community, their lenses coldly focused not just on communal areas but conspicuously angled toward my home. Bright floodlights now illuminated our driveway at night, bathing the house in harsh white light, a visual assault that kept my family awake and uncomfortable. My previously carefree morning jogs turned into tense, unsettling rituals as the patrol vehicles, emblazoned with exaggerated HOA security logos, began trailing me openly. It was as if the board sought to remind me that my every move was watched, documented, scrutinized. Then came the inspections, invasions cloaked as standard compliance checks. HOA officials arrived frequently and unannounced, each time demanding entry under vague pretenses, measuring grass length with rulers, critiquing paint chips on windowsills. Scrutinizing trivial details they exaggerated into costly fines. My mailbox was cited for being 2 inches taller than regulation. A shrub Lisa planted years ago suddenly became non-compliant foliage, and a modest flagpole in my front yard was declared an unapproved structural modification. Notices stacked up rapidly, fines ballooning into absurd totals, each petty infraction another jab, Another intrusion designed to chip away at our sense of security and belonging. It wasn't just me they targeted, though. My family became unwilling pawns in their twisted game. Lisa, once the lively heart of neighborhood social events, now found herself subtly ostracized, avoided by neighbors too fearful to be seen openly siding against HOA authority. Each whispered conversation she walked into ceased abruptly, replaced with forced smiles and uncomfortable silence. Her garden, once her pride and refuge, was repeatedly singled out, flowers uprooted by inspectors who cruelly deemed certain blooms unacceptable, leaving Lisa heartbroken and disillusioned. Yet the true line crossed was when they began targeting Emily. My 10-year-old daughter, bright-eyed and gentle, had always loved playing with friends at the local playground. Now she was routinely confronted by HOA security personnel who loomed over her small figure, sternly reprimanding her for trivialities such as leaving her bicycle improperly parked or lingering too long on the swings. One afternoon, Emily ran home sobbing, terrified by an officer who accused her of vandalism after she innocently chalked hopscotch squares onto the sidewalk. Witnessing her tears, hearing the tremble in her tiny voice as she recounted their bullying words, ignited a cold fury within me. It was no longer mere harassment. It had become psychological warfare aimed at my family's very core, attempting to fracture our resolve by targeting the most innocent and vulnerable among us. The mounting pressure strained our once harmonious home life, turning casual dinner conversations into tense exchanges punctuated by frustrated sighs and terse, clipped sentences. Lisa, her vibrant spirit dimmed by ongoing stress, grew withdrawn, frequently expressing fears about the increasing animosity and surveillance enveloping our home. Each inspection, each notice of violation, became another point of contention between us, sparks igniting easily as nerves frayed under constant stress. "We can't keep living like this," Lisa whispered one evening, her voice edged with exhaustion, eyes heavy from sleepless nights spent worrying. Emily began having nightmares, waking frequently in tears, terrified by visions of HOA officers storming into her room. She clung more tightly to us, her usual laughter replaced by cautious silence. The serene life I'd envisioned and worked so hard to build was disintegrating around me, slowly eaten away by calculated hostility masquerading as regulation enforcement. The realization that my family had become collateral damage in Barnes's twisted vendetta left a bitter taste in my mouth, intensifying the simmering anger that had settled deep within my chest. Just when I believed it couldn't get worse, the HOA launched a vicious smear campaign designed to isolate us further. One sunny Saturday morning, a small gathering of neighbors stood quietly, avoiding eye contact, as Barnes theatrically taped notices to every mailbox bearing an ominous headline: "Alert! Suspicion of illegal activities." In carefully chosen words dripping with ambiguity and thinly veiled threats, the notice implied my family was involved in activities detrimental to community safety. Absurd insinuations ranging from drug distribution to hosting unauthorized, dangerous combat training sessions. It was blatant defamation, devoid of truth or evidence, yet powerful enough to cast shadows of doubt over our reputation. Neighbors began avoiding us entirely, their eyes averted during chance encounters, doors shutting quickly as we approached. Even those we'd previously counted as friends seemed reluctant to associate openly, frightened of being drawn into Barnes's widening net of intimidation. Determined to regain control and protect my family, I turned to official legal channels, expecting justice, or at least a semblance of fairness. Yet, navigating the bureaucratic maze erected by HOA leadership quickly proved maddeningly futile. Official complaints vanished mysteriously. Meeting agendas changed abruptly, excluding my concerns entirely. Calls to local government offices yielded only vague promises of future reviews, constantly deflected by administrators too wary or perhaps too complicit to act decisively against Barnes. I filed formal appeals meticulously, documenting each absurdity, each blatant misuse of authority, only to have them dismissed on technicalities manufactured on the spot. One afternoon, after weeks spent entangled in this hopeless red tape, I confronted Barnes directly in his office, demanding to know why my appeals were systematically ignored. He merely smirked coldly, leaning back comfortably in his chair, fingers steepled with cruel arrogance. "You see, he drawled condescendingly. "The rules protect those who make them. You're playing a game rigged in our favor." His words confirmed the harsh reality I had begun to suspect, that this was no ordinary bureaucratic incompetence. Instead, it was a deliberate, orchestrated attempt to corner and crush me emotionally and financially, all under the facade of legitimate governance. Leaving Barnes's office that day, frustration coursed through me, raw and intense. Yet beneath it, clarity began to crystallize. I recognized then the stakes involved weren't merely my family's comfort or social standing, but our fundamental rights to exist freely without persecution or harassment. Despite outward composure, my inner resolve grew more steely and calculated. I silently vowed never to surrender, no matter the personal toll, no matter how isolating or exhausting the fight became. My years as a professional fighter taught me well. Battles aren't always won in the first round, nor even the second. They're won by endurance, by unwavering determination, by refusing to bend beneath relentless pressure. The HOA board believed their relentless campaign would break me, forcing submission through continuous, escalating cruelty. They underestimated, however, the depth of strength forged through years spent battling in cages, arenas filled with hostile crowds, roaring in anticipation of my defeat. I'd faced far worse foes, survived harsher punishments than anything Barnes and his cronies could imagine. Each unjust fine, each insulting inspection, each whispered slander only sharpened my resolve, transforming quiet indignation into firm determination. The battle lines were clearly drawn. The fight had become intensely personal, and though my stance remained calm outwardly, inwardly, I braced for what lay ahead. If Barnes thought escalating his harassment would break me, he was deeply mistaken. Instead, his cruelty only ignited a deeper resolve, setting the stage for a confrontation I would not back away from, a battle for my home, my dignity, and above all, my family. The sun had barely risen on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and I stood in my kitchen brewing coffee, attempting to savor the brief peace of the early hours before Oak Ridge Hills awakened fully. Lisa was upstairs helping Emily prepare for school, their quiet voices drifting down warmly, a gentle contrast to the tension that had lately become our constant companion. Despite the relentless pressure from Barnes and his HOA enforcers, I had resolved not to let fear or frustration invade these small family moments. Yet, that day, everything changed irrevocably. It began with a sudden, intrusive pounding at the front door, heavy fists hammering relentlessly, echoing through the hallway with aggressive urgency. Startled, I quickly set aside my mug, racing toward the door as anxiety knotted my stomach. Peering through the glass, I was met with the hostile faces of 3 HOA security officers, men I recognized only by their cold eyes and arrogance. Before I could unlock the door, they barged in forcefully, nearly knocking me backward as they pushed past, brandishing clipboards like shields and acting with calculated aggression. "Inspection!" one barked sharply, voice booming unnecessarily loud, his colleagues spreading rapidly through my home as if conducting a drug raid. Their behavior was deliberate and invasive, a far cry from any standard compliance check. Lisa descended the stairs quickly, Emily trailing behind her, both looking pale and frightened. Lisa stepped protectively in front of our daughter, demanding to know the reason behind this intrusion. But her questions were ignored entirely. Instead, these intruders methodically began tearing our home apart, ostensibly searching for so-called illegal modifications, but clearly relishing the chaos and distress they caused. Furniture was roughly shoved aside, drawers were yanked open and emptied carelessly onto floors. Emily clutched a small stuffed bear tightly, tears pooling in her eyes as one officer rudely brushed past, knocking family photographs off walls with cruel indifference. Then my heart stopped momentarily as I heard the sharp sound of shattering glass from our living room. Rushing inside, my chest clenched painfully at the sight of Lisa on her knees, gently cradling fragments of an antique vase, an irreplaceable heirloom passed down from her grandmother. Her quiet sobs echoed through the room, a sound etched permanently into my memory, haunting in its utter helplessness. Fury surged within me as I turned sharply toward the officers, demanding explanations for their violence and disrespect, but their faces showed only contempt and defiance. Emboldened by authority, twisted far beyond any rightful bounds. Before I could fully voice my outrage, a familiar figure entered leisurely, stepping through the front door with an air of smug satisfaction. It was Barnes himself, hands clasped neatly behind his back, his gaze taking in the destruction with chilling detachment. "Such a shame," he drawled mockingly, eyes dancing cruelly between my grieving wife and terrified daughter. "Perhaps if you'd been more cooperative, things wouldn't have escalated." His thinly veiled threat hung ominously, filling the tense silence. "You and your defiance are poisoning this community," he continued, voice low and dripping venom. "This is just a taste of what's to come if you don't comply fully." His words ignited something primal within me, yet I remained outwardly calm, knowing a single misstep or show of aggression would only give him more ammunition. His presence, however, revealed more clearly than ever the deep corruption rooted within our HOA board, authority abused to enforce personal grudges and vendettas without restraint or remorse. The incident left my family deeply scarred. Lisa withdrew further into herself, deeply shaken by the violation of our home and the loss of something so precious. Emily's nightmares intensified, her trust in the safety of our home shattered. Each night I held her trembling figure, soothing whispered promises I desperately hoped to fulfill. Our neighbors, witnessing the spectacle, retreated further, isolating us completely, their own fears magnified by Barnes's vicious propaganda. To them, we had become the cautionary tale, the example of what happened to those who resisted Barnes's iron-fisted rule. Despite feeling utterly alone, I began quietly gathering evidence, carefully documenting every instance of harassment, every violation notice, every damaged item. Photographs of the destruction wrought upon our home, recordings of aggressive inspections, and meticulous notes on Barnes's cruel words became my arsenal, hidden safely away from prying eyes. Each file I gathered was a piece in a greater puzzle, building toward a confrontation I sensed was unavoidable. The final straw came in the form of another public announcement, one designed explicitly to humiliate and break my spirit. Barnes, in his ruthless arrogance, scheduled a public event specifically aimed at removing my so-called hazardous gym equipment by force. Notices appeared overnight on every lamppost, mailbox, and community bulletin board, inviting neighbors to witness the spectacle. Barnes was openly framing it as an act of community protection, branding my home gym a dangerous, illegal facility that threatened neighborhood safety. My stomach churned as I read those notices, a cold anger settling into the marrow of my bones. This was not simply harassment. It was a carefully orchestrated attempt to publicly degrade and ruin my family's reputation beyond repair. Barnes sought not just submission, but humiliation, displaying our punishment openly as a warning to anyone else contemplating defiance. Standing quietly beside me, Lisa gazed at the notice, her usually gentle eyes flashing with a quiet resolve I hadn't seen in weeks. "Enough," she murmured softly, slipping her hand firmly into mine. "We won't let them win." Her words, quiet but fiercely resolute, bolstered my own determination. My family had suffered greatly at Barnes's hands, but in that moment, we silently recommitted ourselves to the fight, unified once more by shared defiance. Despite feeling profoundly isolated, my mind sharpened with renewed clarity. Barnes's arrogance had led him to underestimate me severely. He saw a quiet neighbor who could be bullied into compliance, unaware he'd provoked someone trained not merely to endure punishment but to turn it into strength. As the day of the scheduled public humiliation approached, I worked tirelessly, refining my documentation and quietly consulting trusted legal advisors. I meticulously planned my next steps, knowing that my strategy had to be flawless. This fight wasn't merely personal, it had become symbolic, representing resistance against tyranny cloaked in false righteousness. Barnes had openly declared war, believing his authority untouchable. Yet, beneath my calm exterior, a powerful determination grew steadily, burning hotter each passing hour. Barnes saw my silence as defeat, unaware I was simply preparing, quietly marshaling my strength and resolve. As neighbors whispered nervously behind closed doors, the community braced itself for what was promised to be an unprecedented spectacle. A deliberate attempt to crush the spirit of anyone daring to resist Barnes's oppressive regime. But while they gathered anxiously, Barnes waiting smugly for submission, I was no longer simply preparing, I was strategizing, setting my own trap. They believed their display would break me, unaware they had instead awakened something unstoppable. The day Barnes publicly humiliated my family marked a turning point, not toward surrender, but toward an unyielding, calculated resistance. They intended to humiliate. Instead, they inadvertently forged my resolve into hardened steel. Barnes' brutal tactics had set the stage for a confrontation neither he nor Oak Ridge Hills would ever forget. In their arrogant cruelty, they had forgotten one critical detail. They weren't merely attacking a homeowner. They were confronting someone whose entire life had been forged in battles far more brutal than their petty harassment, someone now determined to turn their orchestrated humiliation into the very foundation of justice, retribution, and ultimate victory. From the moment Barnes announced his plan to publicly seize my gym equipment, every waking second became an exercise in meticulous preparation. I approached this confrontation as I had countless battles in the cage, strategically, methodically, and quietly determined. I understood clearly that Barnes sought not just to remove equipment, but to dismantle our dignity in front of the entire community. To withstand this attack, I needed a bulletproof defense. With relentless diligence, I gathered every piece of evidence I had carefully compiled, dozens of photographs documenting the aggressive searches, videos from our security cameras capturing every unwarranted intrusion, and copies of threatening notices deliberately designed to intimidate us. Each document was a weapon, precisely cataloged, carefully preserved. My desk overflowed with folders, each meticulously labeled, dates, times, names, and offenses recorded with precision. As my resolve deepened, so did the clarity of my mission. This wasn't simply about resisting Barnes's authority, it was about exposing it for what it truly was. Corruption cloaked as community protection. With the evidence secured, I quietly reached out to neighbors I knew had endured similar abuses, individuals who, like me, were trapped beneath Barnes's heavy fist but afraid to fight back openly. Conversations took place in hushed tones, late at night, away from prying eyes. Slowly, trust was established. Alliances formed not through open rebellion but through shared pain and mutual understanding. People I'd barely spoken to before now revealed their hidden stories of harassment, intimidation, and financial ruin. Families who had been privately humiliated or threatened found a quiet strength in knowing they weren't alone. One by one, they agreed to help, cautiously promising testimonies and support when the time came, but still afraid to risk openly opposing Barnes. As the date approached, Barnes made no attempt to hide his intentions. Bright eye-catching flyers plastered the community bulletin boards, boldly announcing the seizure and removal of illegal equipment from my property. The announcement was framed as a festive event, a twisted attempt to turn our humiliation into entertainment, complete with refreshments and banners, encouraging neighbors to witness community justice in action. Reading those flyers, my pulse quickened with anger, but I suppressed it beneath layers of calm composure. Barnes's arrogance was profound. He didn't just want compliance, he demanded submission. But that arrogance was also his greatest weakness. He couldn't imagine anyone successfully opposing him. Thus, he never considered the possibility that he himself could be exposed. This blind spot became my advantage, allowing me to carefully position my defense without raising suspicion. The more openly he promoted this spectacle, the stronger my resolve grew. This would not be a day of defeat. It would become the turning point that dismantled Barnes' corrupt reign permanently. Yet, even as I prepared, uncertainty permeated Oak Ridge Hills. Neighbors who once greeted me warmly now glanced away nervously, conflicted by loyalty to community ties and their growing discomfort with the blatant cruelty Barnes displayed. Conversations at mailboxes became stilted and awkward. Friendly nods became strained acknowledgments. I sensed that many secretly supported us, yet none dared to openly align themselves against the HOA's ruthless tactics. Late at night, when the community was quiet, anonymous notes occasionally appeared under our front door. Brief messages of support scribbled hastily. "Stay strong. You're not alone. We're rooting for you." Though unsigned, these gestures meant everything to Lisa and me. They reminded us that beneath the fearful silence, courage was simmering quietly, waiting for a catalyst to spark a collective stand against tyranny. The evening before Barnes's orchestrated spectacle was filled with palpable tension. Oak Ridge Hills lay under an oppressive quiet, the air itself heavy with anxiety. Inside our home, Lisa moved through rooms with deliberate care, her usually gentle eyes now sharp with resolve. Emily hovered nearby, sensing the gravity of what was coming, her small face set with determination that belied her youth. We decided that evening to spend quiet time together, away from the documentation and strategies that had dominated our lives in recent weeks. Sitting closely together in the living room, we shared a simple meal, but each bite felt weighted with significance. Each glance carried quiet reassurance. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Emily finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. I looked at my daughter, recognizing the innocence Barnes had so carelessly trampled upon. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied, voice steady and reassuring. "No matter what happens tomorrow, we will face it together, and we'll come out stronger." Lisa gently squeezed Emily's hand, nodding firmly. "They underestimated us," she said softly, but with conviction. "They think they can scare us away, but we're stronger than their fear." Her quiet strength buoyed my own courage, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. That night, after Emily drifted uneasily to sleep, Lisa and I sat quietly together, listening to the soft creak of our home settling around us. Words felt inadequate, but our silent understanding spoke volumes. Together, we acknowledged the gravity of the battle we faced, recognizing the risk involved, yet knowing retreat wasn't an option. Our unity became a fortress, strengthened by shared resolve. I reassured Lisa that every piece of evidence, every carefully planned defense was secure, ready for deployment. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her voice barely audible, filled with quiet defiance. "Whatever happens, never let them take our dignity." I kissed her forehead gently, promising silently to uphold that vow, not just for us, but for every neighbor who'd suffered quietly beneath Barnes's rule. As dawn slowly broke, our home hummed with quiet anticipation. Outside, the community awoke under an oppressive weight, every household aware that today would irrevocably alter our neighborhood. From my window, I saw neighbors stepping outside cautiously, their expressions conflicted, a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Some stared openly at our house, faces etched with concern. Others pretended indifference, clearly torn by internal battles between fear and empathy. Barnes's crew arrived early, setting up equipment ostentatiously, a stage with microphones, large banners emblazoned with slogans about community safety. Even refreshment stands perversely, inviting neighbors to participate in our disgrace. Their movements were deliberate and exaggerated, intended as a psychological weapon designed to intimidate us further. Yet, standing quietly behind my closed door, observing their preparations, I felt none of the anxiety Barnes anticipated. Instead, my heartbeat steadied, calm, and focused. My training as an MMA fighter had prepared me well for moments exactly like this. Moments where calmness, strategy, and self-control determined the outcome of battles. Barnes had expected a swift victory. A humiliating surrender played out dramatically before an audience of neighbors cowed by his authority. He was blind to the truth that I had prepared for this day more thoroughly and quietly than he could imagine. Inside my home, carefully hidden evidence waited patiently, ready to dismantle his corrupt regime publicly. Allies, though silent and cautious, stood ready to offer their testimony. Everything Barnes had built was about to collapse spectacularly, not through violent confrontation, but through meticulous planning and irrefutable proof. As the community gathered hesitantly outside, voices murmured uncertainly, a mixture of unease and morbid fascination drawing a crowd despite evident discomfort. I took a deep breath, knowing that the storm Barnes had orchestrated was about to collide head-on with the quiet, determined strength my family had forged from weeks of suffering and resilience. Today was intended to be our public humiliation. Barnes believed he had already won, utterly convinced his spectacle would break us completely. He stood confidently outside, unaware that his arrogant cruelty had instead created a powerful catalyst for justice. As I stepped forward, Poised and prepared, I knew this calm before the storm was not Barnes's victory, but mine. His grand public spectacle would indeed take place, but not as he'd planned. Instead, the community was about to witness the beginning of Barnes's downfall, his arrogance exposed, his corruption revealed, and his reign permanently shattered by the unbreakable resolve of a family refusing to surrender their dignity and their home. Morning sunlight flooded Oak Ridge Hills with deceptive warmth as Barnes' orchestrated humiliation event began unfolding. My pulse steadied and my breathing slowed to a calm rhythm, every instinct sharpened by years of disciplined MMA training. Outside, the entire neighborhood gathered uneasily, drawn reluctantly by curiosity and the spectacle Barnes had aggressively promoted. Standing firm in my driveway, I awaited the confrontation, my heart resolute, my expression composed. Lisa stood beside me, her posture graceful yet defiant, hand gripping mine in silent support. Emily watched quietly from the porch, her frightened gaze now replaced by cautious optimism, faith in her father's quiet strength evident. Across from us, Barnes's HOA enforcement team, decked absurdly in faux military gear, marched forward, smugly confident, openly dismissive of the quiet resolve radiating from my stance. Barnes himself stood behind them, a cold smile creasing his face, his arrogance palpable, certain of his impending triumph. The lead officer stepped forward, brandishing a clipboard arrogantly, demanding compliance and immediate surrender of my gym equipment. Neighbors shifted uneasily, whispers floating through the crowd, tension crackling like electricity. For a brief, charged moment, silence hung heavy, each heartbeat echoing loudly. My voice broke that silence with measured authority. "You're trespassing and violating my rights," I stated firmly, holding their gaze without flinching. "Remove yourselves from my property immediately." The officers laughed mockingly, ignoring my calm command, stepping aggressively forward to physically intimidate me. This moment of arrogant disregard triggered something deep inside, a precise readiness honed over years in the unforgiving world of professional MMA. As the lead officer reached out to physically shove me aside, my response was instantaneous, precise, and perfectly controlled. With practiced ease, I deflected his arm, pivoting smoothly into a position of complete dominance, immobilizing him effortlessly without causing injury. Gasps echoed from neighbors, stunned by the swift and expert response. Chaos erupted as two others lunged aggressively, convinced numbers would subdue me quickly. Their misplaced confidence crumbled immediately beneath calculated efficiency. My movements were fluid, controlled, each defense a textbook example of skillful restraint combined with undeniable power. In seconds, Barnes's enforcers lay sprawled, defeated but unharmed, humiliation etched across their faces, realizing far too late they dramatically underestimated their opponent. Barnes's smug expression faded abruptly into horror as his enforcers stumbled back, disoriented and defeated. "This is assault!" he shouted desperately, panicked eyes searching for supportive neighbors. Instead, the crowd stared silently, captivated by what they'd just witnessed. Not reckless violence, but a calm, disciplined defense, each action undeniably justified. Seizing the moment, I addressed Barnes clearly, my voice resonating strongly across the silent crowd. "You've used your authority to bully and intimidate," I declared, holding eye contact firmly. "Today, your abuse ends." His face twisted bitterly, enraged by his public humiliation, yet uncertain how to regain control. Before he could respond, I nodded toward Lisa, who stepped forward with quiet dignity, presenting our meticulously gathered documentation, files detailing every instance of harassment, intimidation, illegal surveillance, financial manipulation, and corruption that had been systematically perpetrated by the HOA leadership. Neighbors watched, eyes widening with disbelief as page after page revealed Barnes's calculated cruelty. Lisa handed copies methodically to everyone present, calmly narrating evidence of intimidation, false accusations, forged records, and embezzlement of community funds, all orchestrated by Barnes and his cronies. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, meticulously cataloged, and presented with absolute clarity. Every whispered rumor, every hushed fear within the community, suddenly crystallized into undeniable truth. Barnes stood paralyzed, horror and disbelief etching deeper lines into his once arrogant face. Suddenly, police cruisers arrived, lights flashing, officers stepping out swiftly, their authoritative presence immediately shifting dynamics decisively. I had strategically involved law enforcement beforehand, presenting the evidence privately, ensuring their arrival precisely when needed most. Barnes' eyes widened desperately as officers approached calmly, arrest warrants clearly visible. His protests were pathetic, drowned by overwhelming evidence and decisive action. He and several board members, complicit in his corrupt schemes, were handcuffed publicly, led away amid stunned neighbors, their veneer of power shattered utterly. The HOA security officers, humbled and disillusioned, watched silently, their arrogance evaporated by stark reality. Barnes, stripped of false authority, now faced genuine justice. Amid the aftermath, neighbors approached hesitantly, gratitude and shame mingling visibly in their expressions. Quiet apologies whispered. Handshakes exchanged with renewed sincerity. Cautious friendships rekindled through mutual relief. The oppressive atmosphere lifted palpably, replaced by quiet celebration and heartfelt acknowledgement. Later that evening, local news crews arrived, cameras rolling as I presented comprehensive documentation publicly. Details of systemic HOA corruption, personal testimonies from community members brave enough to openly support me, now emboldened by my actions. Reports spread rapidly, capturing nationwide attention. Interviews revealed deeper corruption networks, attracting state investigators who swiftly intervened, conducting thorough audits uncovering extensive embezzlement, coercion, and fraud perpetrated by Barnes and his associates. Legal repercussions were swift and decisive. Barnes faced multiple felony charges, ensuring his permanent removal from any future position of authority. Days later, officials formally dissolved our HOA, replacing corrupt oversight with transparent community governance, committed openly to fairness, integrity, and genuine neighborly cooperation. The transformation within Oak Ridge Hills was remarkable. Neighbors reconnected openly, freed from fear-driven silence. Community events once again became joyful gatherings, filled with laughter, genuine friendships, and sincere gratitude directed frequently toward me and my family. Lisa's garden flourished vibrantly once more, symbols of renewal blossoming alongside restored community trust. Emily rode confidently through streets again, her smile bright, innocence restored fully, assured her home was safe, protected steadfastly by parental strength and communal support. Our home, once targeted, now stood proudly as a symbol of quiet resilience, triumphing decisively over tyranny and oppression. Nationally, our story resonated profoundly, inspiring numerous communities similarly oppressed by corrupt HOAs, sparking widespread reforms, increased transparency, and stronger protections for homeowners' rights. Invitations poured in from advocacy groups, requesting talks, advice, and leadership on combating similar abuses nationwide. Yet, amidst public recognition, my most profound satisfaction remained personal, the renewed happiness shining brightly within my family's eyes. Our bond strengthened immeasurably by shared struggle and ultimate victory. One calm evening, weeks after our decisive triumph, Lisa and I stood quietly in our yard, twilight casting peaceful shadows. "We made a difference," she murmured softly, leaning gently against me, eyes reflecting deep gratitude. I nodded quietly, heart filled with quiet pride, not just for our victory, but for our steadfast refusal to surrender dignity under immense pressure. Together, we had proven strength isn't measured merely by physical might, but by quiet courage, unwavering integrity, and fierce commitment to justice. Barnes had underestimated profoundly, not realizing true warriors aren't defined solely by battles fought physically, but by principles upheld unyieldingly. Now, standing peacefully beside Lisa, our home restored fully, community trust regained completely, I felt profound satisfaction, not merely from vengeance achieved, but from justice firmly established. Barnes' downfall wasn't simply punishment. It symbolized restoration of fairness, decency, and communal unity triumphing decisively over fear, corruption, and oppression. I'd entered the confrontation quietly, yet emerged decisively victorious, respected deeply within my community, not merely as a fighter who defended himself expertly, but as a leader who inspired courage, integrity, and genuine positive change. Barnes sought my destruction through public humiliation. Instead, he'd inadvertently strengthened me, permanently cementing my role within Oak Ridge Hills, not simply as a homeowner, but as a steadfast guardian who fearlessly defended home, family, and fundamental rights against tyrannical oppression, emerging as a hero who stood resolutely against injustice, forever changing our community profoundly, positively, and permanently.